Good afternoon, everybody. I see some people popping in, so we'll give it a minute before we roll. Oh, you know what else I need to turn on? There we go. Now, I have pushed all of the things. So we're good. And we hope that my computer doesn't crash. That's going to be today's biggest challenge. If I can get through this without having Zoom give me an issue. I'm just going to wait one more minute. Hope everybody is having a very fabulous day and staying warm and cozy, and I would love a good fire. Just as a reminder, since this is a webinar, we have disabled the chat feature, but you have the Q&A for any kind of questions that you might have as we're going along. Or if I have had too much caffeine and I'm going too fast and you need me to tell me to slow down, I can do that too. But anyway, so I'm going to turn off my camera so you don't get to watch me bob and weave while I'm talking, and I will move forward. So nuts and bolts of accessibility and UDL. So today we're going to talk about the how-to. Okay, so we've talked, if you've been to the previous two, you know that we've kind of covered the why and the and how we can incorporate many different aspects of UDL. But today we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty and the nuts and bolts. So we're going to go over the general guidelines. Then we're going to talk about structures, specifically in Canvas. Then we're going to talk about two specific Canvas tools, Accessibility Checker and UDoIt. So the general guidelines when building courses and thinking about accessibility. So first of all, what are the guidelines and where did they come from? So the WCAG 2.0, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, determine what the best practices of accessibility are for online spaces. So why do we use these? It's because they are an industry standard. And they cover a lot of accessibility issues, but they don't cover every single one. So if you want to know more about those, you can always look it up online, and all you really have to type into any Google search is WCAG 2.0, and you're going to get all kinds of information. So two ways to look at this are perceivable and operable. So perceivable, providing text alternatives for non-text content. So pictures, videos, images of any kind. So all of those need to have text alternatives for anybody who is accessing that material with a screen reader. So providing alternatives for time-based media. So if you're looking at videos, you want to know the captioning piece of it. So Studio obviously captions for you, and you can add those captions. You can also simply provide a transcript as a downloadable file that meets that portion of accessibility. Creating content that can be presented in different ways. So looking at, like I just said, having a transcript, having a video, having text, alternative text for images, and having very clear descriptions of those images, providing hyperlinks that are actually a link and not just an HTTPS. So you don't want to have that, because when a screen reader is reading that, it would read the entire link out rather than saying what the link is going to. And then making it easier for users to see and hear content. So thinking about adjusting audio files, thinking about making font readable, as well as size and different font styles. Operable, so making all functional available, and let me try that again. Make all functionality available from a keyboard. So if you don't have, if you're only accessing a computer with a keyboard, so thinking about moving a mouse. If you are not looking at the screen, finding where to click with a mouse is very difficult. So thinking about making content so that you can use either the tab function or the up and down, that is all on the keyboard. So providing users enough time to read and use the content. So making that content available longer prior to asking students to do anything with it. So when you're looking at availability dates on assignments, are your availability dates long enough for a student who may be using an alternative device to access your course material? Or did you give them enough time? Do not design content in a way that is known to cause seizures. So that would be flashing screens or anything that moves very quickly, that could set off someone's a seizure if they have epilepsy. Provide ways to help users navigate, find content, and determine where they are. So being very clear at the beginning of your course with course navigation, course video that it talks about your course tour, as well as a course map. So understandable, make text content readable and understandable. So using clear, concise structure to paragraphs, making guidelines or directions to assignments, bullet points, so that it is very easy for someone to understand. So making web pages appear and operate in predictable ways, that's self-explanatory, and help users avoid incorrect mistakes. So if you click here, is there a way to get back out? Is there an undo? Is there a back? Of course, we know in Canvas there is. And robust, maximize compatibility with current and future user agents, including assistive technology. So you're thinking about all of the things that could be possible as far as bringing in those accessibility tools to help all students. So now we're going to talk about what does that look like. So this is talking about structure. And I am as guilty of this as anyone, sometimes using the quick way to do things rather than the correct way to do things. For example, thinking about the structure of a page, using a table to organize images, but the table is not really a table. But for a screen reader, it would come up as a table, but I was using it to organize images. So those are the kind of things that we're going to talk about. So course navigation, which we help you with, accessible images. I just talked about accessible tables. I've also already talked about accessible hyperlinks. I've talked about video captioning and or transcripts, document structure with headings, and then searchable PDFs. So sometimes a PDF can be an image. So you need to make sure though that it is not an image. It is something that is searchable. Oh, let me explain the picture. So notice here we have a new tool in Canvas. It's not really new, but you may not have looked at it before. And it's right here at the bottom, and it is the accessibility checker. And it helps you to identify things that might cause a problem for someone who is using a screen reader. So consistent course navigation. It should be logical. And now we're talking about not just the course menu, but we're talking about module structure. So when you begin thinking about organizing your course from the very beginning, think about what is that one way you're going to structure every single module. Is it going to be by week? Is it going to be by unit, by topic, by chapter? Whatever it is, it should be consistent. It should not be week 1 and then chapter 1 and then week 2 and then chapter 2 for the next module. That's very confusing, and students won't know whether they're going by weeks or chapters. So making sure that everything is sequential in the modules also helps with providing the student with a surefire way of making sure they complete everything they need to complete and not missing something. So efficient goes with logical and sequential. So thinking about your module and thinking about organizing it as in first you do this, then you do this, then you do this, and as you're moving through the module, you want to also think about naming the items in the module consistently so that they help the student understand where they are. So if you have a week that covers multiple topics, you could have a file, you could have an item that could be 1.1 Baroque composers, and then you could have 1.1 Mozart, 1.2 Bach, 1.3 Beethoven. Then you could have 2.0 Romantic composers, and so on and so on. But that could be in the same module, but using the file name and a numbering consistency will help you, a convention, that's the word I was looking for, that helps to identify what they're looking at and how it is connected to other material. So we have helped you with course navigation because we have simplified it down to the bare minimum of what you are going to need or a student will need to navigate through your course. We know that everything that we do is all determined in modules. So once a student knows in one class that everything's going to be found in modules, they should then understand that every other class is going to also have their content in modules. So looking at a sample module, you can see here it's talking about that numbering that I talked about. But if I had more information that was separate from the birth of the planet and that topic, I could continue that week by changing the numbers and still keeping it within a week if that was what I chose to use as the organizational structure for my modules. So looking at this image, we also know that not only do we have to think about consistency of modules and naming conventions and things like that, but we also have to think about what are we using to bring attention to things in courses. Are we using bold? Are we using color? Are we using structure? What are we using to explain to the student that, hey, this is important? If we are using color and color only, then for a student or anyone who is looking who may have some form of color blindness, they may totally miss what we thought they would understand as, hey, you need to pay attention to this as being important. So looking at this image that is very muted and thinking about what would someone who is red-green colorblind see in this image? And you would, the idea is they would see trees, yes, but if you were trying to describe something in the picture based on the color, it would be very difficult. So what is an accessible image? An accessible image means that you have descriptive alt text that is not the file name. So the file name should never be your alt text. So you would need alt text for a shape, for pictures, for smart art, for any kind of other object. And when you are writing out your alt text, it should cover the function, context, and it should be labeled. Or if it is only there for decoration, then it should be labeled as decorative. So a screen reader would simply skip over it. Complex images can be done in Canvas multiple ways. You can use a very long description by doing it either under the image, or you can include a link to a page that is not actually posted anywhere else in the course, but it is linked within the, excuse me, it is linked within the alt text so that it can take the student to that very descriptive long image. And then if you have anything that has color in the image and the color has meaning, you want to explain that meaning. If you are putting the information outside of the image and not in the alt text, you don't want to duplicate that either. So if you are in this, it says do not add information that is found in the surrounding text. So if you already have information about the image prior to that, then you do not need to repeat that in the alt text description. So, and then I've already talked about the other two things, which is you could say refer to caption as the alt text, and what it would do is refer the student to a page that contains the lengthy description. So when you click and you want to add alt text in Canvas, you can see that it gives you a little box, but it also gives you a checkbox to make it available as simply decorative, and you can move on. You can also change the dimensions here as well, but most people choose to do that by using the slider option in the rich content editor. Color. So color and contrast. There is a high contrast option that you can turn on in Canvas if that helps to really separate colors. And I'm going to give you some examples by what I mean by that. So I've already talked about that you need to make sure you have clearly defined if color is bringing out or addressing something that is important or a function. You need to make sure that you have described that. So one of the things everybody knows is you want to avoid red-green combinations or colors that are rich in red or green hues. So that can be a problem, but that's not the only thing. So you can also think about other kinds of color blindness. So, and I'm going to show you. Here we go. So here are some examples. So bad examples, of course, blue on black, that's very difficult to read. Green on orange, red on green, gray on purple. All of those are not far enough apart in the color spectrum to be a high enough contrast for people who may have some color deficiencies or some color blindness to be able to distinguish. It makes it very difficult. So you can see some other examples that are good examples. And then you can also see an example of what someone who is have some color blindness of many different forms, what they would see. So if you were describing this caprese sandwich and you were talking about how red the tomatoes are, if you're looking at this last picture down here at the bottom, I don't even know if I don't know what a red tomato is, I'm only going to be able to guess that a tomato is this image because I know the shape. Tables. So again, I talked to you briefly about tables, and I said something talking about using tables for organization. That is one thing you do not want to do. So if you do have a table, your table should have row and column headers. All the headers should be labeled. There should also be a description of the table. And inside the table, it should be clear and very simple, and not think of the same as the PowerPoint rules, not too much text in a single cell. And then also looking at any table containing data. And you want to use proportional sizing rather than absolute. Hyperlinks. talked about this as well. And we've all done it. We've copied a link, thrown it in something and sent it off without thinking about, ooh, when a screen reader reads that, it's going to go HTTPS://. Yes, we don't really want to do that to anyone. So we want to make sure that we have given the link of descriptive text and then highlighted it and put that long URL in the background. We also don't want to use the word link. Click on this link. Guilty of that as well. Or click here. There you go. What is here? Where is here going, right? Also, you don't want to capitalize links. You don't want to use characters that are not text. You want to avoid URLs as text. You want to make sure that it is concise. And you also want to restrict the number of links on a page. And then also don't require, when you click on a link, it should not automatically require a download. So make sure that it doesn't directly link to a download or force a download. Again, some more rules. Make sure you let the user know when it's going to open a new window. Be aware of pagination and alphabetized links. Be mindful when using anchor links. So if you have a presentation with the table of contents and you have anchor links in there, make sure it doesn't say slide 7. Make sure slide 7 has a title and you put that title in the table of contents. Also, make sure you underline the links and don't change the way a link looks. Try to keep it the way that all links look. When you're using an image as a link, make sure you use the image as a link with a description that the image is a link, or provide the image as a link and the link itself with a description. Obviously, we want to always eliminate broken or empty links and make your links consistent. And then also test that color contrast, which you can do with a Canvas tool. So we have some good examples and bad examples. Obviously, this is easy enough to see. It's very descriptive. Click here. Told you that was bad. And in this email, all of these have been done appropriately so that they are not long links and you know exactly what it is you are clicking on. Videos. Video captioning is, again, can be done directly within Studio. And we can do that by going to Studio, finding the tabs underneath, clicking on Captions, and click the language that is spoken in the video, and then Request. So audio, you can also do it in Zoom, obviously, because we're doing it right now, and you can see the auto transcription is happening. Now, we also know that auto transcriptioning is it's mostly accurate, about 85%, but we also know there are problems, especially if you're teaching a subject that has a lot of very difficult words to say, or very the terminology is very specific for the subject. I'm thinking biology and nursing, and words like Germana. That's something that I don't think I found an AI yet that's actually typed out Germana correctly. It's usually Joanna or Germanic or any other things, or dramatic, and all of those. It comes out 100 different ways as far as when you're looking at it. So be aware of those kinds of things when you're looking at the captioning. And finally, document structure. So when you're looking at organizing your pages in Canvas, you want to think about organizing them by using headers and using that as your structure, so that your document structure is very clear and it's not done by bolding words or using color or anything, excuse me, like that. So Microsoft and Google both have built-in accessibility checkers. So you can use those as well if you would like. And then it's much easier to see what kinds of things you might need to work on. Finally, PDFs need to be searchable. So it needs to be an OCR. So you need to be able to hit Control F on a PDF, and you should have this little find box pop up. and then you should be able to type in a word and then hit next and find all references to that word in the document. So it needs to be searchable. This is an example of a non-searchable PDF because it is an image. So it's just an image. You can't select on it. You can't, oopsie, you can't check it. You can't do anything else. You can only look at it as an image. So that is something that we would not want to do. Okay, so I have spent 25 minutes talking about those kinds of things. And now I'm going to turn it over to Wesley to give you some more nuts and bolts.
Yes, thank you. I was struggling to find the unmute button. So you may have looked at all of these things that that Paige just walked us through and thought, how am I supposed to keep all of these things in mind while I'm designing courses or building courses, or maybe you've never actually looked at this inside your course and maybe thinking what you need to do. Well, there are two different tools that can be used quite easily for you to be able to accept your course, or excuse me, for you to be able to check your courses for accessibility. One is this Canvas Accessibility Checker. And this is available wherever the rich content editor exists. If you look at the bottom of this image here, you'll see there's a little circle with the Da Vinci Man in the middle. And that's the accessibility checker that exists inside of Canvas. The way that this works is it checks everything that's inside of that rich content editor box. So everything that's going to be inside of where you have typed, that's what it's going to check for accessibility. What's nice about this is that Canvas has already partnered with the WCAG guidelines to be able to make sure that all of the other pieces of Canvas are accessible. The only thing they can't manage necessarily is what we type in. And so that's why they provided this tool. So when you click that tool, it's going to check for a couple of different things. It's going to check for adjacent links and paragraph headings, for your image alt texts, for text contrast, for sequential headings and lists, and it's going to check your tables. So it's going to check a bunch of stuff. And the way that it does that is by checking the HTML code. So it's not necessarily something that you may see, but it's going to be something that exists on that page within the code. Once you click the icon, you'll be able to see a couple of different things. First, you'll have a little bitty circle that shows up with those that number, that notification bubble. And that's going to let you know whether you have any accessibility issues on that page. We've actually turned that function on for our Canvas instance. And so if you've been working in a Canvas course and noticed that all of a sudden there's a little man with a number on top of him, that's because we've turned this on so that we'll be able to see at a glance what pages have accessibility issues. But once you click the link, you're going to have a little sidebar pop out. And it's going to start walking you through all of the different errors that it's found. So for example, in this screenshot, you'll notice that it's found one of 4 errors. That's where you see issue 1/4. And then it's going to tell you what the issue is. You'll have the image file name should not be used as the alternate attribute, and it's going to give you an option of where to change that. So it says change alt text, and it gives you a place to type. So you can delete what's there and replace it with what it should be. Once you've done that, then you'll be able to click apply, and it'll move to the next issue on the page. Yep. So yeah, so there's an option of, there's an example of what we've done. We've gone in, we've typed in what that image alt text is, or you could click where it says decorative image. And so the screen reader would just ignore that image altogether. You click apply and it moves to the next issue. Once you've done all the way through, you get some nice balloons and confetti, and you can celebrate that there are no more accessibility errors on that particular page. This is a really helpful tool if you are doing it in terms of, I'm just writing one page, or I've just written an announcement, or I've just edited something, and I just want to make sure that I've kept accessibility in mind. But if you've never done any type of accessibility check on your course, then there's another tool that operates a little bit better, and that's UDoIt. UDoIt is a free tool that came out of the University of Central Florida, and it stands for the Universal Design Online Inspection Tool. And it checks all of Canvas. It checks all the announcements, assignments, discussions, files, pages, the syllabus, module URLs. It checks all of the pieces of Canvas to ensure that accessibility guidelines are being met. To be able to use this tool, it also checks the course for the use of headings and page structure, alternative text for images, your table headers, color contrast, video captions. One thing about the video captions, it doesn't always pick up like if there's a YouTube video, what it's going to look like. So it may bring back an error that says, hey, this needs captions, but it's a YouTube video, it has captions. So that's just one thing to think about. But as you're running this You Do It option, you'll notice that it gives you a place to fix it. It's called You Fix It. They were real creative with their naming convention. So in this screenshot, you'll notice that we've added You Do It to the course navigation. If I remember correctly, we've left it in the course navigation for the spring courses. So it's already there for you. Students don't see it, only instructors do. But if it's not there, you can just simply go to the settings inside the course, go to navigation, find You Do It, and drag it up to the top list and click save. And that way it'll show in the course navigation and you can use it. After you've done that, you'll be able to see the different options that it will scan. We recommend, especially if it's the first time to run it, that you leave them all on. And that way you can make sure that your course is being checked, all of the pieces are being checked, and you can move forward. The only thing that you may not want to include is syllabus, because since we use simple syllabus at Germana, you don't necessarily need to check the syllabus page inside of Canvas. Once it's done with that particular scan, you'll notice that you get a report summary here on the left. At the top, you'll notice there are errors in red, and the bottom are blue suggestions. There are always more suggestions than errors in every single course I've run this in. But that's the things that how You Do It separates it. The errors are things that are definite accessibility issues and need to be resolved so that all students have equitable access to your course materials. The bottom suggestions are just things to continue to work on and continue to help improve the accessibility of your course. So when we're talking about a workflow here, work through the errors first and then go back and begin working through suggestions. Once you find an error, you'll notice that it has this little red box here that says error, and then you can click the You Fix It tool. Once you click You Fix It, it's going to open up and show you a bunch of different options. So the first thing that you'll notice is, next line. Sorry. There we go. Yeah, the first thing that you'll notice is it gives you an option to preview the source of that error. That's going to allow you to understand what's actually happening on the page. Because if you don't click that preview source where it says close issue sources, means that we've already clicked preview. You don't know what's happening. So for this particular issue, it says that there's a link that should contain text. But when I click preview the source, you'll notice that that box is blank. Well, that means that that link doesn't actually exist on the page anymore. It's just left over in the code, which is where we notice in that source, it gives me the HTML tag that is no longer being used. Since that link is not being used, I could either A, provide new link text for that link to be associated with. So I could type that in that box that, type in, this is for, I think it's for the open discussion. I could type in discussion link or something like that. Or if it's not being used, I could click the option to delete the link completely instead. And once I click submit, it's going to automatically do that on that page. So it's not going to take me back to the page and make me go find it in the HTML code to fix the issue. It's going to do it for me. And that's why we really like this tool, because you can click it, you can type the things in all in one spot, and it fixes the accessibility issues throughout your whole course. Here's another example where we're looking at an alternative text. So you'll notice that after you have the error, it shows the image. I can type in an alternative text or mark it as decorative, and I click submit. And then I get this nice little green button that says done. And I don't know if you are like me, but I often like to see check marks and green checks and things that tell me that I've accomplished something. So if you really like that type of work when you're building your courses and designing your courses, then this is the tool for you, because you can come back through and see how many things that you've done. One thing that I will caution you on about You Do It is that once you have run it, like let's say that I've run the scan and then I need to step away from it for about 15-20 minutes and I accidentally close that tab. Once I click You Do It again, it's going to ask to run the scan again. So you're going to run the scan again and you'll have to go back through it and pick up where you left off. It doesn't, that's the one thing about You Do It, is that it doesn't just pause on that screen if you navigate away from it. You got to come back and look at it again and run the scan again. Now it does keep a record of previous scans, so you could go back and look through them. But as far as the You Fix It piece, you're going to have to go in and intentionally run the scan again. So these two tools are very, very useful for you, and they're here for a reason. And we're talking about them to you because we want you to make sure that, that our courses are accessible. This is not just an issue as far as good course design, though it is an issue of good course design. It really is an issue of equity. We want to make sure that all of our students, no matter where they are, how diverse they are, that they're able to make sure that they have the resources they need for a good course experience, a meaningful course experience. So we have a couple of questions coming in before we get to the what now. I'm going to go through those, and if you have any questions, please use the Q&A option, and then we can talk about them here before we give you what you need to do next. It says, when I have 2 PowerPoints in a module, it shows correction with adjacent links when the same URL should be a single link. So that would be something, Teresa, that we would want to kind of look at. I think if I could see it, it might be helpful to see what it's actually looking at. If it shows where if it's linking to the same PowerPoint, that's what it's showing, is that 2 PowerPoints, or if it's shown as the same PowerPoint, it may be thinking that it's one link, or maybe there's not enough separation between the 2 links where you need to just go in and maybe add a little bit of text between them so that you can make sure that the accessibility checker doesn't think that they're supposed to be the same link. That's what it's trying to do, is see that they're the same link. Okay. Any other questions so far? All right, if not, then let's talk about what we would like you to do next. If you've been coming to our UDL webinars, you know that we've been talking and giving you a little bit of homework each time to work on in a specific course. So the idea is that you come to the webinar, you've learned this information, and now we want you to go apply it to a course. And so hopefully at this point, or if this is your first day, no big issue, but go back to your chosen module. Sorry, my dogs are about to bark for a second. Go back to your chosen module and then use either UDoIt or the Canvas Accessibility Checker on that module and look for issues regarding accessibility and then resolve them. Go through them and see if you can resolve those particular issues. So yeah, that brings us to an end of this particular webinar. What we wanted to do was talk a little bit about nuts and bolts and help figure some things out for you. Some other things, just very quickly before we kind of wrap up, as we're waiting for any more questions that may come in. We really want to shout out Wynn Stevens and the Office of Accessibility Resources. They have a ton of resources to help promote accessibility in your courses, not only for you, but also for students. And so if you have students who come to you and say, hey, I'm having issues or I need help, we would highly recommend reaching out to Wynn. And I'll turn my video on so you can see me talking to you. We highly recommend reaching out to Wynn and make sure that he is aware of the issue, that he can connect with that student, but also that you can ask him in his office for other things that may be helpful for you. For example, they have software that can be useful for helping make documents more accessible. And give me just a second, Paige.
And when is, I'll help him out just a little bit because I know how that is. So there are many things. There's something called JAWS that can be, and Dragon Speak for students who need to speak and have it come out with kind of in the written form. So you can use that as well. There are many different things that he has just recently purchased that might be of interest to you for your students who may need some additional support or different ways to access your course material. Okay, so that's pretty much all I have.
I just put a link in the chat. We have access to a great book on doing UDL in your courses. It's called Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, and the library has been able to access this for us. So I just put the link to that in the chat. We encourage you to go look at it. You can read it online, you can download it, and you can start using that resource about how we use UDL in our courses. So that's an excellent resource to continue your journey. In fact, let me make sure I click everyone and do that again because it just went to Paige. My bad.